I had ridden into the gorge of Ashenfall believing I knew every danger the Varenhold border could offer me. I was wrong. The ambush came from the ridge walls, arrows first, then the war howl of the Kareth raiders pouring down the scree slopes on both sides like water through a broken dam. My column was 200 strong. We had ridden that pass a dozen times in the years since I took the Varenhold crown, and I had let routine make me careless. That is the only confession I will make about that morning. The rest belongs to her. The gorge was narrow. That was the trap's genius, no room to wheel, no ground to flank on. My guard closed around me on instinct, iron-trained, but the raiders had numbers and the high ground and the fog that pools in the Ashenfall cut on autumn mornings, the kind that turns a man 10 paces off into a gray smear. I fought on foot when my horse went down. I fought until the raider line broke and scattered back up the scree, and then I stood in the settling smoke and counted what I had left. 63 of my 200 still standing. The others lay on the gorge floor in the gray light, some dead, some not yet decided. My senior captain, Brevin, caught his breath beside me. He had a gash down his left arm that had soaked his sleeve dark, and he was pretending it was nothing, the way soldiers do. "Hold position," I told him, and my voice came out flat and iron, the way a king's voice must when he cannot afford to let anyone see what he is feeling. "Get the wounded onto the eastern shelf. I want the perimeter closed before that fog lifts." "My lord," he moved. I looked at my dead, 67 men who had followed me out of Varenhold's iron gates that morning. Names I knew. Wolves I had run beside on the solstice hunt, men whose children I had held at the blessing feast. The weight of it settled over me like a second armor, heavier than steel. That was when I saw her. She came out of the fog from the direction of the nearest slate-roofed village, Ashkeld. Its name was a border settlement of 200 souls who farmed the thin soil on the gorge's western lip, and had learned to keep their doors shut when raiders moved. She came alone, on foot, carrying a worn leather kit that I later learned held every healing supply she owned. She walked into the middle of my dead, and dying without hesitation, without any weapon, without any of the careful sideways creeping a sensible person would use when entering a field full of armed and grieving wolves. She simply walked in as though she had every right to be there, and every intention of being useful. I watched her from the tree line, where Brevin had placed my personal guard. I should have sent someone to stop her. Border protocol was clear. Civilians stayed clear of military casualties until the scene was assessed and secured. I opened my mouth to give the order. My wolf, who had not moved without my command in 11 years of rule, went flat to the earth inside my chest. Not in submission, in attention. The way a wolf goes still when it has scented something it cannot name and is not ready to name and knows, somewhere below the naming, that it will matter more than anything else in the world. I closed my mouth, I watched. She went to the nearest man first. One of my younger guard, Torvin, who was 22 years old and had a raider's blade still in his side, and was making the kind of sounds a man makes when he is deciding whether to go or stay. I watched her kneel beside him in the ash and the blood without flinching. She opened her kit with the efficient calm of someone who had done this before, too many times and in too difficult places. She spoke to him. I was too far to hear the words, but I could see his shoulders change, the locked, suffering tension in them easing by degrees, the way a rope eases when the weight is lifted. She pressed both hands to the wound and held steady for a long time. He lived, I found that out later. He was the first, and there were 17 others she brought back from the edge that morning, one by one in the fog and the quiet after the battle, while my surviving guard stood on the perimeter and watched her the way you watch something that doesn't follow the rules of the world you thought you understood. Brevin came to stand beside me after the third man she tended. "Who is she?" he asked, low enough that only I heard. "Find out," I said, and I did not look away from her. He sent a scout to Ashkeld. The scout came back with a name, Marin, and not much else, because she was not the kind of person who generated much information. She had lived in Ashkeld for 4 years. Before that, no one knew. She appeared on the border road one autumn with her kit and her silence and a skill with wounds that the village elder said bordered on the uncanny. And she had stayed because the village needed a healer and she, apparently, needed somewhere to be. She took no wages. She asked no questions about pack allegiance or Highland politics. When the raiders moved through, she hid, as the village did. When the raiders passed, she came out and fixed what they had broken. No mate, no pack, no rank that anyone could name. She had no wolf, or if she had one, no one in Ashkeld had ever seen it. That was the part that should have made her a stranger to my world. A wolfless woman on the Varenhold border was an unusual thing. My pack stretched from the iron watchtowers on the North Ridge to the slate villages along the gorge's eastern face, and every soul under my protection was wolf-blooded, pack-bonded, named in the rolls. This woman was in none of them. And yet my wolf lay flat and still and patient as I had never felt it in 11 years, watching her. She moved through the morning. She did not rest. She did not ask my guard for water or for help or for anything at all, not even acknowledgement. She found the wounded by some method I could not fully track, a sound, a scent, an instinct, and she went to each of them in turn and she worked, and she did not stop until there was no more working to be done. By the time the fog began to lift and the pale autumn sun reached the gorge floor, she had done what my own field healers, 4 of them, trained in Varenhold's hall and equipped with every supply the capital's stores could provide, were still working toward. The ones my healers had stabilized, she had steadied further. 2 men my healers had judged beyond saving, she had not agreed with, and both of them were breathing. She stood up at last beside the last man she had tended, stretched the long stillness out of her back and looked at her hands. There was blood on them. There was blood on her dress, her arms, her knees. She looked at the state of herself with a kind of calm assessment that held no distress in it, only the practical accounting of someone who is already thinking about what comes next. Then she walked toward the dead. I understood what she intended before she began, and something in my chest locked so tight I lost a breath. She began to bury them, with her hands, with a short-handled tool from her kit, with the stones that lay loose on the gorge floor. Not in haste, not in a way that was only gesture, properly, with the careful attention of someone who believed it mattered whether the dead were given their ground or left to the morning. It would take hours, my guard could see it. Brevin looked at me, and I knew he was waiting for me to send soldiers to help her, or to stop her, or to at least go and speak to her. The logic of command said I should have done any of those things long before now. I said nothing. I did not move from the tree line. I told myself I was assessing the field. I told myself I was watching the perimeter. I told myself a dozen things that were not the truth. The truth was that I could not look away from her, and my wolf would not lift its head from the earth. And somewhere between those 2 facts was something I had spent 11 years telling myself I was done expecting. I had not always been this careful with myself. There had been a time in the first years of my rule when I had thought the fated bond might come for me the way it came for other kings, sudden and undeniable, the kind of recognition that rewrites the world in a breath. It had not. 11 years had come and gone, and the council had brought me candidates, and the moon festivals had passed, and nothing had happened, and I had eventually concluded, with the flat practicality that war teaches a man, that some wolves were simply not made for the bond. That I was one of them. I had stopped looking. She lifted a stone and set it in place and looked at the grave she had made for the first of my dead, and she said something, just a few words, quiet, too far for me to catch, and then she moved to the next. My wolf put its chin on the earth and watched her. I stood in the tree line for a very long time, until I understood that I was not going to be able to be sensible about this. Then I did what any reasonable king would do. I called Brevin over, told him he had command, and stood at the tree line's edge for the rest of the afternoon, watching a wolfless border healer bury my dead one by one in the gray autumn light, and felt something I had not felt in 11 years begin, very slowly, to open. By late afternoon, the gorge had cleared. The Kareth raiders would not be back today. They had lost enough on the scree slopes to make retreat worthwhile, and Brevin had scouts on both ridges now. The wounded had been moved to the eastern shelf where the ground was dry and the stone wall cut the wind. My field healers were working steadily through the evening tasks, resetting and rebinding the work Maren had done, checking her assessments. They checked and rechecked, because a wolfless woman from a border village had no business being as skilled as this, and my healers were proud professionals who needed, I think, to verify with their own hands that what they were seeing was real. It was real. Torvin, the young guard who had been the first, with the blade still in his side, was sitting up. He was eating. He said the woman had spoken to him while she worked and he could not remember exactly what she had said, but that he had stopped being afraid. That was how he put it. He had stopped being afraid. I stood over him for a moment and did not know what to say, which was unusual for me. I am a king. I am accustomed to having words. Rest, I said finally, and moved away. Across the gorge floor, Maren had reached the last of my dead. She had been working for 7 hours. She had not asked for water. She had not asked for food. My guard, one by one, had stopped pretending they were looking at anything else, and they were watching her with the complicated expression of soldiers who have seen enough death to know what the kind of sustained courage she was showing costs. The last grave was deeper than the others. The man had been Large Druven, one of my senior guard, a 12-year wolf who had followed me since before I was king. I had known his wife's name and his son's name, and the way he laughed at the solstice feast, a big rolling laugh that made everyone in earshot laugh with him. He lay on the gorge floor covered with the cloak she had found somewhere, one of my men's, laid over him with care, and she was working steadily, methodically, making his ground. I walked out of the tree line. I had not made a decision to do it. My feet simply moved, and my wolf lifted its head for the first time in hours and rose with a quiet steadiness that felt nothing like the urgent, surging thing it was in battle, and I walked across the gorge floor toward her. She did not hear me until I was 10 paces off. Then she looked up. She had gray eyes. I noted this in the way you note the detail that your mind has been waiting to confirm. In the fog and the distance of the morning, I had not been able to see the color. Now I could. Gray, clear, and entirely unafraid. She looked at me the way she had looked at the state of her hands earlier, a calm assessment, direct and practical. I was wearing my battlefield armor. I had the Varenhold seal on my shoulder. I was, I have been told, a sufficiently large and imposing figure that most people find a measured approach sensible. She looked at me for 2 seconds, noted what she was looking at, and went back to the grave. "The last one," she said. Her voice was low and steady. "I'll be done before dark." I stood there. I am a king. I have stood before raider warlords, before the council of the 7 Highland packs, before the iron seat of judgment where a man's fate is decided. I am not easily made speechless. "You have been here since morning," I said. "Yes," she didn't look up. "You came from Ashkeld." "Yes." "You are their healer." "I am a healer," she said, with a quiet precision that suggested the distinction mattered to her. "Ashkeld is where I live. It's not the same thing." I crouched down across the grave from her, on the other side of the stone line she was laying. She glanced up briefly, not startled, just checking the situation, and then went back to her work. "Maren," I said. She looked up then, a little longer this time. "You know my name." "I sent someone to ask." She considered this. Her hands kept moving, steady and unhurried. "You've been in the tree line since morning," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Watching." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, The young one with the blade, is he still alive? Yes, he's eating. Something happened in her face. Not a smile exactly, but close. A brief easing of the controlled attention she wore like a second skin. Something that was just for a moment purely glad. Good, she said. I wasn't certain about the angle. It had moved. Blades do when a man keeps fighting. He said you spoke to him. People die easier when they're not alone and frightened, she said simply. And they live easier too. The mind is part of it. People forget that. I stayed crouched across from her and watched her hands and tried to locate the words for what I was doing here, because Brevin had command of the field, and I had no tactical reason to be kneeling in the dirt across a grave from a wolfless border healer, while the light went gray and gold over the gorge walls. I had no words for it. My wolf had them, perhaps, but my wolf was not speaking. It was just present, more fully present than I had felt it in years, watching her the way it had watched her all day. You buried all of them, I said. Someone had to. That's not. I started again. My men could have done it. Your men were tending the living, she said. These men also matter. She set the last stone in the line and sat back on her heels and looked at Druvin's grave. 12 years, one of your guard told me. He'd been with you 12 years. His name was Druvin. He had a son. She was quiet, then she said, I'm sorry. 2 words. Nothing elaborate, nothing formal. But she meant them in a way that landed differently than condolence usually does. Not the shaped comfort of ceremony, but something that came directly from whoever she was, unmediated. I stood up. She stood up across from me, and the grave was between us, and the last of the afternoon light was falling on the gorge in long amber bars. Maren, I said, I am Aldrich of Varenhold. She looked at me steadily. I know who you are, she said. Then you know I have the authority to. I stopped, because I didn't know how to finish that sentence. To what? To make her stay, to ask her to come to the capital, to tell her what was happening inside my chest. Every approach I could think of sounded like command, and command was not what this was. She waited, watching me with those gray eyes, patient in the way someone is patient when they've learned that rushing things does no good. I owe you a debt, I said finally. That was the truest simple thing I could manage. You don't, she said. They needed tending. I can tend, that's all. 17 of my men are alive because of you. They were going to try to stay alive regardless, she said. I just helped. I looked at her for a long moment. She looked back without any of the awareness that most people carry when the Alpha King of Varenhold is looking at them. The faint calculation of how to be useful, how to be noticed, how to benefit from the attention. She had none of that. She was just looking at me, as direct as she had been looking at the gorge floor all day, because I was something that required assessment, and she was a person who assessed things honestly. My wolf inside me made a sound I had never heard from it before. Not a howl, not the territorial thing, something much quieter, something that was almost just a breath. Will you be all right getting back to Ashkeld? I asked. She looked faintly surprised that I was asking. Then, yes. I've walked it in worse light. Take one of my men. I don't need. Take one of my men, I said again, and this time I let a small amount of the tone that makes people stop arguing come into it. Not much, just enough. She studied me. Then, all right. She began to pack her kit, her movements the same efficient calm they'd been all day. There was nothing hurried about her, nothing self-conscious. She packed her tools and tied the kit and straightened her skirts and looked at the row of graves she had made in the gorge floor, and she stood with them for a moment in a way that was not performance, just the proper end of a thing. I'll send stones, I said, proper markers. They'll be cut in Varenhold and brought down. She turned to look at me, and something moved in her expression that she then carefully put away. Good, she said. That's good. A pause. Thank you. She walked away across the gorge floor toward where my guard stood, and one of them fell in beside her without being told. reading the situation with the good instinct soldiers develop, and I stood at Druven's grave and watched her go and did not move until she was out of sight. Brevin appeared at my shoulder. He had been my captain for 7 years. He knew better, generally, than to say anything when I was in this particular kind of silence. Tonight he apparently decided the occasion called for an exception. "My lord," he said carefully, "who is she?" "A healer," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "A healer," he repeated, in the tone of a man who suspects that word is not doing the full work required of it. "Maren of Ashkeld. No pack, no wolf, no rank." "No." Another silence. The last of the amber light was leaving the gorge walls. "My lord," Brevin said, "your wolf." "I know," I said. He said nothing more. He was wise enough for that. I stood at the grave until it was dark. I did not sleep that night. This was not unusual after a battle. The cost of command is that the names of the dead move through your mind in the small hours like a current you cannot stop. Faces, moments, the particular way each of them had of being alive. I had learned to carry it. What was unusual was that it was not only the dead who moved through the long dark. She was there too. Not the way a man thinks of a woman when desire is the thing, something less simple and more complete than that. The gray eyes, the patient hands, the way she had looked at the gorge floor all day as though each wounded wolf on it was the only one in the world while she was tending him. The way she had spoken to Torvin, whoever she had found to say, to make the dying go easy in him. The way she had stood over Druven's grave at the end of it all with no audience and no witness, and simply given him the proper moment. I lay in the field commander's tent and let the dark move through me, and my wolf lay still and breathed, and I turned Brevin's unfinished question over in my hands. "Your wolf." I knew. I had been telling myself since morning that I did not know, that I was a practical man and a battle-worn king, and not prone to wishful reading of a thing that might mean nothing, that 11 years of silence from the bond was evidence that I was not the kind of wolf who received it. I had been telling myself this with some conviction. Alone in the dark, I stopped telling myself anything. I let it be what it was. A wolfless border healer had walked into the worst morning I had known in years, and my wolf had gone still and watchful in a way it had never done for any person in 11 years of my rule, and she had spent 7 hours proving herself the bravest and most quietly good person I had seen in all those years. And when I had finally walked across the gorge and crouched across a grave from her, she had looked at me with gray eyes and no calculation, and spoken to me with a plainness and a care that made me feel, for the first time in a long time, that I was simply a person being spoken to honestly by another person. My wolf had not howled. It had breathed. It had put its chin down and watched her and breathed. I did not know how to name that. I was not sure I needed to name it yet, but I was very sure I needed to go back to Ashkeld, and that whatever I said when I got there needed to be true. I lay awake until the watch changed twice. Then I made myself rest, because a king who doesn't rest makes errors, and I had made enough of those today. Before dawn, I was up. Brevin was already at the eastern shelf, overseeing the preparation of the wounded for transport. The journey back to Varenhold was 2 days on the Highland Road, and the worst injured would need careful handling. The dead would come behind, on the supply carts that would be sent from the capital when word reached it. I found him as the first gray edge of dawn reached the ridge. "I'm going to Ashkeld," I said. He looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who has already assembled the information and is only waiting to confirm his read of it. "Alone." "The guard." "How many?" "All of them." That surprised him. Not the number made tactical sense, given the road and the previous day, but the particular way I had said it, as though I was already thinking of this less as a security matter and more as something else. "We're needed on the transport," he said carefully. "The transport can wait half a morning," I said. Ashkeld first. He held my eyes for 3 seconds, which was slightly longer than was technically within the protocol of our relationship, and then he said, "Yes, my lord," and went to ready the horses. We rode to Ashkeld as the sun crested the eastern ridge. The village was a mile from the gorge mouth, close enough that the sounds of yesterday's battle had surely reached it. The slate rooftops were just visible over the last fold of the Highland Road, and smoke was rising from the houses, and the people of Ashkeld, who were accustomed to keeping their heads down when soldiers moved, would know by now that the soldiers outside their village this morning were Varenhold wolves and not Kareth raiders, and were watching from their doors. She was not watching from her door. She was in the small garden behind her house. I could see it as we came over the ridge, and she was pulling something up from the soil with the same methodical focus she had given to the gorge floor. Her kit was on the step behind her, clean now, repacked. She had changed her dress. She had not slept yet, I thought, looking at her, or not much. The set of her was tired in the bone-deep way that follows a long expenditure, but her hands were still steady. She heard the horses and turned. She took in the full guard, all 63, mounted, arranged on the Highland Road above her garden, and then she took in me at their head, and she stood up straight and waited. I dismounted. I walked down to the garden gate alone. The guard stayed on the road. She met me at the gate. "You came back," she said. No alarm in it, not quite surprise, something that was more like a question she was asking herself, turning it over to see what it meant. "I said I would send stones for the graves," I said. "I also need to say something to you, and it seemed better to say it in person." She waited. Her gray eyes were steady. Behind her, the garden went on producing its late autumn last, lean herbs, winter roots, the things a healer plants because they are useful and makes no show of their beauty. I had composed the words in the night. They had seemed adequate in the dark. Standing in front of her in the morning light, they seemed considerably less so. I used them anyway, because the truth generally survives imperfect delivery. "Yesterday you did something that cost you a great deal, and asked for nothing in return. You moved through my dead and my dying for 7 hours, and you gave each of them your full attention, and you asked for no recognition and no payment and no standing. You did it because it needed doing and you were capable of doing it." She said nothing. She was listening the way she did everything fully. "I have led wolves for 11 years, I said. "I have seen soldiers with titles and armor and pack standing behave with far less courage and far less care than you showed on that gorge floor yesterday. I want you to know that." A breath of wind moved through the garden. A strand of her hair crossed her face, and she brushed it aside without looking away from me. "All right," she said quietly, "thank you." And then she said, "Is that all?" It was not said with impatience. It was not said with any sharpness. It was said with the honest directness I had seen from her the whole previous day, the question of someone who wanted to know the true shape of the situation so she could respond to it properly. I looked at her for a moment. I could hear my own guard behind me on the road, very still, very quiet 63 wolves who had watched the whole previous day and drawn their own conclusions, and were now watching this with the careful attention of men who understand they are witnessing something that matters. "No," I said, "that is not all." She waited. "My wolf has not been still for 11 years, I said. "Not like it was yesterday, not like it is right now." I paused. "I don't know what you are to me yet. I know what I feel. I know what my wolf knows. But you are not in my pack, and you have no reason to trust me, and I am not going to stand here and tell you what that means and expect you to simply receive it. So I'm asking." She was very quiet. "I'm asking," I said again, "whether I may come back, whether I may bring you to Varenhold and show you what's there and let you decide what you think of it. No command in it, no expectation, just permission to return." The wind moved again. In the village behind her, I could hear someone drawing water from a well, the creak of the rope, the hollow sound of the bucket, the ordinary morning sounds of a small place carrying on. "You are the Alpha King of Varenhold," she said. "Yes." "And you're asking permission." "Yes." She looked at me for what felt like a very long time, though it was probably only a few seconds. Her expression was doing the thing it had done in the gorge, that honest assessment, the turning of a thing in the light to see its true dimensions. "I've been in Ashkeld for 4 years," she said. "Before that I was somewhere else for a few years. Before that somewhere else." A pause. I stopped expecting to have a reason to stay anywhere permanently. I said nothing, because this did not seem to call for words yet. "I'm not," she started again. "I have no wolf that anyone has seen. I have no pack. I have no rank. I have no political value to an Alpha King. I don't know what you think you saw yesterday, but I'm not. I'm not whatever your council would want in a." "Marin," I said, and kept my voice quiet. She stopped. "I am not asking on behalf of my council," I said. "I am asking on behalf of myself and my wolf." I paused. "Which are, it turns out, the same thing." She looked at me a long time after that. Then she turned and looked at her garden, then at her house, then at the kit on the step. "I would need to arrange for someone to take the village healings," she said at last. Something unlocked in my chest. I kept my expression still. "That can be arranged. I'm not making any promises about what I think of Varenhold. I haven't seen it. No promises necessary." She nodded slowly, looking at her garden with a complicated expression. "It's been 4 years," she said again, softer. "I did wonder sometimes whether I was going to just—" She didn't finish it. "Whether you were going to just stay," I said. "Yes," a breath. "Whether I was going to just stay forever, somewhere no one knew my name, being useful." She turned back to me. It's not nothing that, being useful." "It is not nothing," I agreed. "It is, in fact, a great deal more than most people manage, but it is also not everything." She looked at me. Her gray eyes were not soft. That was the wrong word for her. Everything about her was too steady for soft. But they were, for a moment, open in a way they had not been the day before, when she was in the work and the work was the whole world. "All right," she said. "All right, you'll come." "All right, I'll come," she said, with a faint note of something that was not quite rye and not quite warm but was somewhere in the particular territory between them. "Don't make it something larger than it is. I'm just agreeing to see the place." "Of course," I said, and I was careful to keep whatever was happening in my chest from making it into my voice. I turned and walked back toward the guard. Behind me, I heard the sound of her picking up the kit from the step. Brevin met my eye from horseback and said nothing, which was the correct response. She rode with us to Varenhold. I gave her the second horse, a gray mare, calm and well-mannered, from my personal string. She mounted without assistance and without ceremony, the same way she did everything. The guard arranged themselves around us on the Highland Road and we rode, and the morning opened out over the gorge country, and the far ridges went amber and rose with the autumn light, and I rode beside her and did not try to fill the air with words. She did not fill it either. She looked at the country. She asked at one point the name of the range to the north, the Varen Peaks. I told her that the kingdom was named for, where the iron came from that built the watchtowers. She looked at them for a long moment, and then looked ahead again. "Sometime around mid-morning," she said, not turning her head. "The young one, Torvin, he should have the wound checked at 3 days and at 7. The depth was significant. Someone capable should look at it." "I'll arrange it," I said. "If there's heat in the tissue at 3 days, it's not healing clean. Don't let anyone tell you it's the wound settling. It's not. It needs to be opened again. I'll make sure the healers know. Tell them to ask me if they're uncertain. I'll look at him when we get there." She said this in the tone of someone adding a task to an existing list, matter of fact, as though she had already decided that being in Varenhold meant she would continue to be useful in Varenhold, whatever else was or wasn't decided. Something about that, the ease of it, the assumption of usefulness as her natural state, the fact that she was already thinking about Torvin's wound, landed in me with a quiet weight. She did not know how to not care for the things in her reach. That was who she was. My wolf understood this. It had understood it since morning in the gorge, watching her bend over the wounded. We reached Varenhold before dark. The capital stretched along the highland shelf above the gorge country, iron watchtowers on all four approaches, the great hall behind its stone walls lit with the evening torch fires, the sound of the pack moving through the early night. The gate guards straightened as we rode through, and there was a moment of open curiosity on a few faces as the column entered, and they took in who rode at my side. A woman no one recognized, simply dressed, on my gray mare. I gave Maren the guest chambers in the south wing. The chambers were comfortable and private, and had a window that looked over the wall to the highland country beyond, and I chose them for that reason. I had a feeling she would want to see open ground. I was right. When I came to the door an hour later to check that she had what she needed, she was at the window. She turned when I knocked, and the particular quality of attention on her face told me she had been looking at the peaks. "Is there anything you need?" I asked from the doorway. "No," she said. Then, "Yes. Does your infirmary keep Renroot? The dried kind. It's useful for the kind of tissue inflammation Torvin's wound is likely to produce." "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'll find out. If they don't, I can work around it, but it's easier with it." She turned back to the window for a moment. "The view is good," she said. "I thought it might be." She glanced at me over her shoulder, brief and assessing, and then looked back at the peaks. "I'm going to go down to your infirmary in the morning," she said, "and look at the wounded, if that's allowed." "It's more than allowed. I won't interfere with your healers. I'll just look, and I'll tell them about Torvin." "Maren," I said. She turned fully. "You are not here as a courtesy or as a subject," I said. "You are here because I asked you to come and because you agreed, and because my wolf has been still for everything it's never been still for since the moment you walked onto that gorge floor." I held her gaze. "You may go anywhere in Varenhold you wish. You may look at anything you wish and touch anything you wish to touch and speak to anyone you like. You are not a guest in the formal sense. You are not here to be housed and managed. Do you understand?" She looked at me for a long time. Something moved in her expression that she did not quite put away. "I'm beginning to," she said quietly. I left her at the window with the peaks beyond. 3 days. She was in the infirmary every morning by the time I was out of the War Council. She spoke with my healers with the same plain directness she used for everything, not over them, not past them, but alongside them, with the careful authority of someone who respects expertise and also knows what she knows. They were reserved with her for the first day. By the second morning, 2 of them were following her from bed to bed asking questions. She was right about Torvin. On the 3rd day, the tissue showed heat in exactly the area she had named. She went in herself, calmly, efficiently, and corrected it while he half-joked that he had never been more grateful for anything in his life, and she told him to hold still, or she would correct him too. He told me later, grinning through the discomfort, that she had said it very kindly. I believed him. She explored the capital methodically, the way she did everything, the outer walls, the market, the hall archives where the pack records were kept. She spent a long morning in the archives and came out with a quieter face than she'd gone in with, and I did not ask what she'd found, because it was hers to tell me if she chose, and the archives were for anyone who wished to use them. She walked with me in the evenings, when the day's work was done and the gate was closed. Not arranged. She simply appeared when I was coming back from the outer wall at dusk, and we fell into step and we walked. She talked in the evenings in a way she did not during the working day. Not about herself mostly, but about what she observed, the way the pack moved, the distribution of the guard, a question about the winter supply routes that was more incisive than most of my counsel's questions. She noticed things. She thought carefully about what she noticed. On the fourth evening she said, looking at the wall, "I looked at the records." "I know," I said. "The pack records for the last 40 years, the Ashkeld Register." A pause. "My mother's name is in there." I said nothing. She was Varenhold Pack. I knew that in the way that you know something without knowing it exactly. She left before I was born. My father was from elsewhere. I grew up, she paused, considering. Elsewhere. When I came to Ashkeld 4 years ago, it was because the road led there. I told myself it was just the road. She was quiet for a moment. "She was pack registered here," she said. "Full-blooded, which makes me—" She stopped. "Half-blooded," I said. "Which is wolf-blooded, Marin. Your wolf may simply be quiet." She turned to look at me. The evening light was on her face, that same honest assessment, but there was something different underneath it, something rawer. "I have never felt anything I would call a wolf," she said. "Not once in my life." "Until," I said carefully. She held my gaze. "A breath." "I don't know," she said. "Something is different since the gorge. Something is different." My wolf had been patient for 4 days with a patience I had not known it was capable of. Now it moved just slightly, a slow and steady motion, the way the tide moves. "That is your wolf," I said quietly. She looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at the wall and the dark beyond it, and the first stars coming in over the peaks. "Marin," I said, and she looked at me. "There is no rush in this. None at all. You came here to see the place. You may see it for as long as you need." "That isn't what you want," she said. "No," I agreed, "but it is what I'm offering." Something happened in her face. The careful held quality she wore, that second skin, eased just a little at the edges. "You are very strange for an Alpha King," she said. "I've been told," I said. A silence. The stars were coming through fully now, clear and cold over the peaks. "I will need more time," she said. "Yes. I need to understand what I am here, what my wolf is, whether I have one, what any of this," she gestured, a small motion that encompassed more than the wall. "I need to understand it before I can tell you anything true." "I know," I said. "You'll wait. As long as it takes." She looked at me with those gray eyes, and for a moment the assessment in them was not practical but something else. The looking of someone who is trying to believe a thing they have been afraid to believe. "All right," she said quietly, "all right." 7 days after the gorge, on the morning of the new moon, when the pack gathered at the great hall for the monthly accounting, the full council and the guard, and the wolves of Varenhold standing in the long hall as tradition required, it happened. I had not planned it, this is important to say. I had given her my word, no rush, no pressure, no expectation. I had meant it. She came to the accounting because she had been watching the way the pack ran, and she had decided, with her characteristic directness, that the accounting was a piece of it worth seeing. She stood at the back of the hall with Brevin II, who had been quietly showing her the workings of Varenhold for days at my request, and she watched. I stood at the front and ran the accounting as I had on the last 36 new moons. The council spoke. The guard captains reported. The winter supply count was read out and acknowledged. The decisions were made. Then the hall began to quieten, as it does at the end, the pack shifting from the formal to the informal, wolves turning to speak to one another, the work of the morning releasing into something more human. I was looking at my council. I was thinking about the supply route from the north. And then every wolf in the hall went still. It happened in the span of a single breath. One moment there was the low sound of 60 wolves in post-council conversation, and the next there was nothing, not silence exactly, but the charged, Electric hush of 60 wolves responding to something they had all sensed at the same moment. The way a pack will go unanimous and sudden when something true moves through the bond. I turned. Across the hall, Marin had gone very still. She was looking at her left wrist, and the expression on her face was one I had never seen from her. Not the calm assessment, not the practical focus, not even the rare, carefully managed openness of the evenings. This was something else, something that had caught her entirely off guard. On her wrist the mate mark burned. It was gold, not the pale shimmer of a weak bond, but deep gold, the warm light of a fire seen through amber, unmistakable to every wolf in the room. It moved on her skin the way living things move, pulsing slowly with her heartbeat, and it was the most clearly defined mark I had ever seen on a wrist, as though the bond had been waiting for 7 days with the patience of a held breath, and had simply, at last, exhaled. She looked up. Her eyes found mine across the full length of the hall. I was already moving. I covered the distance in the quiet that every wolf in the hall held, 60 wolves not speaking, not moving, watching. I came to a stop in front of her. She was looking at me and at her wrist and at me again, and for the first time in 7 days I saw something in her face that was not composed. "I told you," she said very quietly, "that I didn't have a wolf." "Yes," I said. "I think that may have been wrong," she said. My left hand moved. She watched it come. I took her wrist carefully, fully conscious of 60 witnesses, of what this moment was, and I turned her hand so the mark was visible, and I held it in both of mine. The mark at my touch went brighter, not performatively, simply brighter the way a fire goes when it finds more air. She drew a single slow breath. Across the hall, my wolf moved through me in a long, even wave, not the urgent thing of battle, not the watchful stillness of the gorge, but something I had no name for, something that felt like the release of a held breath I had been holding for 11 years. "Marin," I said, and I kept my voice at the register that was between us alone, even though the whole hall was still and hearing. "I told you there was no rush." "You did," she said. "I am still not going to rush you," I said. "But I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you say, I will hold to what I promised, as long as it takes." She looked up at me. The mark pulsed gold between my hands. "Ask," she said. "Will you be my Luna?" I said. Not in ceremony, not yet, not before you're ready." "I'm not asking for the ceremony. I'm asking whether this is something you want, whether you will let me, whether you will let this be real." A silence, very long. Every wolf in the hall waited. She looked at our joined hands. She looked at her wrist. She looked at me. "In the gorge," she said slowly. "I was tending the second man, the one with the shoulder. Do you remember?" "I remember," I said. "And I was aware of being watched. From the tree line I didn't look, but I knew." A pause. "I didn't know it was you, not then. I just knew there was someone watching and that the watching felt different. It didn't feel like danger." She stopped. I thought about it that night. What the difference was, I didn't have language for it. "And now," I said. She looked at the mark. The mark looked back at her with its golden, unhurried pulse. "I've been waiting," she said very quietly, "for something I didn't know the name of for a long time in Ashkeld, and before that, somewhere to stay that would mean something." A pause. "Someone to stay with who—" She stopped, began again. "I have been useful in many places. I have given a great deal to people who received it and moved on. I have been a breath. I have been careful not to want more than that, because wanting more seemed like the kind of thing that leads to—" She didn't finish it. "To being disappointed," I said. "To being left," she said plainly. "To caring about something and then it goes." I held her wrist very carefully in both of mine. "Marin," I said, "I am asking you to let me be the kind of person that doesn't go." She looked at me for a long time. Then slowly, her free hand came up and covered mine. "Yes," she said, "all right, yes." Behind us, from somewhere in the long hall, one wolf let out a low sound, not a howl, not the full throat of celebration, but the sustained, resonant note a wolf makes when a truth has been confirmed that it already knew. Then another. Then all of them, the whole hall, a sound that rose through the stone and the iron and the autumn-cold air like something long held and finally released. She startled at the sound. Then she looked out at the hall, 60 wolves, her wolves, standing in the candlelight and the new moon morning, and the expression that moved across her face then was the one I had been waiting for since the gorge. Not the calm, not the assessment, something that was simply, plainly glad. I brought her hand to my mouth and pressed my lips to the mate mark on her wrist, and she drew a breath at the warmth of it, and I looked up at her and she looked down at me, and neither of us said anything else, because nothing else was needed. The ceremony came 3 weeks later, when the moon was full and the highland air had the first real cold of winter in it. We held it in the great hall with the pack and the council and the wolves of the outer holds who had ridden in when word went north, and word travels fast in wolf country when a king finds his Luna. Brevin stood at my right. Torvin, who was healed now and moving freely and slightly insufferably proud of the fact, stood near the front. She wore gray, her own choice, a gown from the capital's workrooms that she had chosen with her characteristic efficiency, trying 3 and deciding in the time it took me to ask my counsel one question. Gray like her eyes, simple and clean and exactly right. I met her at the hall's great doorway when she came in, and we walked the length of the hall together in the torchlight, and I watched the pack watch her. These wolves who had been her wolves for less than a month, who knew her from the infirmary and the evening walks and the accounting and the slow, steady way she had learned the workings of Varenhold, as though she intended to carry it with her always. And the way they looked at her was not the way a pack looks at a stranger. It was the way a pack looks at someone they already trust. She had earned that not through me, through herself. At the front of the hall I took both her hands, and the mate marks, hers on the left wrist, mine that had appeared the morning after the gorge, and which I had not told her about immediately, because I had not wanted to pressure her, glowed together in the torchlight, gold and warm and absolutely certain. "Maren," I said, for all the hall to hear, "you walked into the worst morning I have known as king, and you gave everything you had to people who had no claim on you, and you asked for nothing. You showed my wolves more courage and more care than I have words to name properly." I held her gaze. "I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the bond that chose you for me." Her hands tightened on mine briefly. "I haven't promised to make it easy," she said, low enough for me alone, and I heard what was behind it, the warmth, the small and careful wryness that was her version of joy. "I know," I said, "I'm counting on it." The pack wolf that began the call this time was Torvin. I heard his voice in it, young and clear and certain, and the hall joined him, full-throated, the sound of 63 wolves naming their Luna in the winter morning. She stood in it, her hands in mine, the mark warm on her wrist, and looked at the pack she had tended before she knew they were hers, and she smiled, a real one, unhurried, entirely her own. I have seen a great many things in 11 years of ruling the Highland wolves of Varenhold. I have seen battles and councils and moon festivals and the bond ceremonies of my people, and all the ordinary, extraordinary business of a kingdom that tries to be worthy of itself. Nothing I have seen before or since has looked quite like that. She is my Luna. She tends the pack with the same steady, unhurried attention she gave to the strangers on the gorge floor, not because she is required to, but because it is who she is, and she has finally found the place where who she is has room to stay. I ride to the outer holds and come back to the sound of her voice in the infirmary, calm and plain and certain, and my wolf goes still with the particular stillness it found in the tree line that morning. Not a waiting stillness, not an anxious one, but the stillness of a thing that has arrived. The graves in Ashenfall Gorge have their markers now iron-cut, sent down from Varenhold, one for each man, Druvin's the largest. She asked me, some weeks after the ceremony, whether I would ride down with her to see them. We rode on a grey morning, the two of us and Brevin and a small guard, and she walked the row of stones in the quiet and touched each one, and at Druven's she stood for a long time. I stood beside her and said nothing, because she was doing what she does, giving the dead their proper moment, and that is not something you interrupt. When she was done she turned and looked at the gorge, the scree slopes, the place where the fog pools at dawn, and she said, "I'm glad I came out that morning." "So am I said. She looked at me, and in her grey eyes was everything the Bond already knew. We rode home to Varenhold in the late morning light, and the highland country spread around us amber and vast, and she rode beside me with the same unhurried steadiness she brought to everything, and I thought, 11 years. 11 years of telling myself I was done expecting this. I was wrong about that, as it turns out. I was wrong about quite a few things. She is, in my experience, very patient about that.